History Zone, where the past comes alive.
I was 12 years old the first time I saw the sky turn the color of dried blood and burned earth. Before that day, the world was wide, open, and golden. Our Oklahoma farm stretched out in every direction like a promise. Wheat fields waved like oceans, and my father believed those fields were our future. He believed in the land, and like most men in our town, he believed good work was enough to keep a family safe. Then came the wind. At first, we treated the storms like strange weather, like something unusual but temporary. Folks laughed as they nailed blankets over windows and stuffed rags beneath doors. The newspapers called it a dust storm, as if it were nothing more than a passing cloud. But when that first great wall of dirt rolled toward us, it swallowed laughter whole. The horizon disappeared. The world went dark at noon. We heard the storm before we saw it. It growled like a freight train coming straight across the plains. Chickens fluttered wild, horses screamed in their stalls, and my mother shouted my name so loud it cracked something inside me. We ran inside, slammed the door, and stuffed every crack we could find. But the dust still came in. It pushed through like it had a mind of its own, sifting across tables, burying dishes, settling into our lungs. By night, my little sister was coughing hard. My father stood at the window like a man staring into war. And in truth, he was. America was changing in those years. The Great Depression had already stolen jobs, savings, and pride. But out here on the plains, something worse was happening. The land itself had turned against us. That night, I learned fear. Fear of the sky, fear of tomorrow, fear that no matter how hard a man worked, it might never be enough. I remember lying awake, listening to the wind scrape against the house like claws. Dust settled across my pillow. The air tasted like soil and sorrow. And somewhere far off, another storm was building. People later called it the Dust Bowl, but to us, it was simply life.
We didn't leave right away. Nobody did. Pride is a powerful anchor, and my father's pride was welded deep into the Oklahoma soil. He said, "A man doesn't run from his land," as if the earth itself was watching and judging him. So we stayed, even as the storms grew worse. School became a strange thing. Some days the sky stayed clear and I'd walk the dusty road with other kids. The sun bright, but the air somehow empty. Other days the storms rolled in so thick the teachers told us to go home early and cover our faces. My teacher kept a stack of wet cloths by the door for when the dust blew in too fast. We'd sit in silence, breathing through damp fabric, waiting for the storm to pass so we could see each other again. Then, the crops failed. The wheat didn't grow. The soil lifted and drifted away like something trying to escape us. Livestock died slow, their lungs filling with dirt. My mother stopped singing in the mornings. My father started staying quiet at dinner. When the pantry shelves began to thin, silence became heavier than the dust itself. Neighbors packed up first. I watched wagons roll past our house, loaded with mattresses, pots, children staring back with hollow eyes. They headed west. California, they said. There's work out there. Farms need people. You can live again. They spoke like California was a shining promise waiting at the edge of America. But leaving meant admitting defeat. And my father hated defeat. We tried everything before giving in. We dug deeper wells. We prayed harder. My father tried planting it in just to prove he could, but the land was gone. It wasn't soil anymore. It was powdered grief. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone behind the barn, his head in his hands. I'd never seen him cry before. That day, I learned another truth of the Dust Bowl. It didn't just break farms. It broke men. And the day my father finally stood and said, "We're leaving," the wind seemed to stop just long enough to listen.
Leaving wasn't like stepping out of a room. It was like tearing out a piece of your chest and walking away from it. We loaded what little we had into an old truck that coughed more than it ran. My mother folded memories into boxes. My sister clutched a rag doll like it held her entire world. We weren't alone. Highways filled with families just like us. Cars piled high with furniture dragged across America like parade floats of desperation. Dust Bowl refugees, though nobody liked that word. Refugees sounded like people who'd lost everything. Maybe we had. The road west was long, hot, and unforgiving. We camped in ditches and roadside pull-offs, sharing thin meals and whispered hope. Nights brought fear. Fear of breakdowns, fear of hunger, fear that California was just another lie. But something else lived in those camps too. Community. Around campfires, strangers became neighbors. Men traded news and rumors. Women shared beans and bread when they could. Children laughed, because children somehow always find a way. Some families had radios, and we heard President Franklin Roosevelt's voice speaking hope to a broken nation. It helped. Not much, but enough to keep us moving. We drove through states I'd never imagined seeing. New Mexico's heat slapped us like a challenge. Arizona's desert stretched forever. But when we crossed into California, something felt different. The air smelled green. Trees rose tall, as if the earth remembered how to care for things here. We whispered, "We made it." We were wrong. Work was not waiting with open arms. California didn't see us as survivors. They saw us as intruders, as Okies, a name full of spit and contempt. That first night in California, lying beneath a sky suddenly free of dust, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not hope, not relief, uncertainty. Because surviving the storm was one thing, surviving people was another.
California wasn't the dream the road had promised. It was fields that stretched forever, but owned by men who guarded them like treasure. It was towns that welcomed your money, but not your presence. It was signs in store windows that said, "No jobs for Okies," and "Keep moving." We settled first in a makeshift camp, a cluster of tents, tarps, and cars turned into homes. They called them Hoovervilles, named bitterly after the president many blamed for the Depression. The government hadn't stepped in yet with help, so these camps grew wild, desperate, and crowded. Life there taught me how close hunger sits beside anger. Men waited outside farms hoping to be chosen for a day's work. Growers picked the strongest for the lowest pay. Sometimes they pitted desperate workers against each other, lowering wages because someone always needed the job bad enough to take less. We picked fruit, cotton, vegetables, whatever would keep us alive. The sun burned like judgment. My hands blistered and bled. My father worked until he collapsed more than once. My mother sewed patches upon patches on worn clothes. My sister learned to be quiet because childhood wasn't welcome in struggle. But we kept going, because that's what Americans do when the world turns harsh. We endure, not with glory, not with speeches, just stubborn breath after stubborn breath. Still, the cruelty hurt. Locals called us dirty, lazy, ignorant. They didn't see we came from land that once fed the nation. They didn't know we used to be proud. They didn't care. But history was turning. Roosevelt's New Deal was spreading changes across the country. New programs, new hope. Government camps built with dignity. Eventually, we moved into one. Clean water, real bathrooms, order, respect. For the first time in years, my mother smiled like she meant it. Things weren't fixed, but they were possible, and possibility is powerful.
Life in the government camp didn't erase hardship. We still worked long hours doing back-breaking labor. We still lived poor, but we had structure. We had meetings where people voted on camp rules. We had music nights and a feeling that we were human again. I grew older fast. By 16, I was working alongside men twice my age. The fields toughened me. The sun carved lines into my skin. But strength grew with the hardship. I learned loyalty. I learned what it meant to stand beside other workers when wages were unfair. Sometimes we struck. Sometimes we won. Sometimes we lost. But we stood together. That mattered. I watched my father transform too. The humiliation of losing the farm never truly left him, but something stronger emerged. Responsibility, persistence, the ability to bend without breaking. My mother became the camp's heart. She helped women cook for families who had less than we did. She tended to the sick. She prayed without quitting. And small miracles appeared. My sister laughed again. Music drifted from guitars at night. Neighbors became family. Those years hurt, but they also shaped us. Pain changes people. Sometimes it destroys. Sometimes it forges. We were being forged.
When the war came, it didn't arrive quietly. It came through radios, in headlines, in the tightened faces of men at work, and in the tears of mothers who had already lost too much in life to lose sons to battle. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, it felt like the world tilted. Factories roared to life, cities hummed with urgency, and even the dusty memory of the Great Depression seemed to step aside for something larger. America was hurting, but it had purpose, and I felt that purpose tug at me like gravity. I enlisted because I believed it was my duty. Maybe part of it was anger at all life had taken from us. Maybe it was gratitude that despite the dust, hunger, and humiliation, this country still offered a future. Mostly, though, it was because my father looked at me with quiet pride and said, "You're strong enough now." After years of watching him fight storms, hunger, and shame, I wanted to fight something too, but something I could punch back, something with a name and a face.
Training was hard, but hardship wasn't new to me. The heat didn't scare me. The exhaustion felt familiar. Sleeping on rough ground was nothing compared to sleeping in a dust storm. When other boys complained about discomfort, I thought about Oklahoma winds that filled lungs with dirt, about California fields that bled your hands open for pennies, and I realized I'd already lived through something like war long before I ever held a rifle. Overseas, I learned what true fear was. Not the slow dread of waiting for storms, but the sharp, cold terror of knowing life could disappear in a heartbeat. I saw bravery, foolishness, cruelty, and kindness all tangled together in the same terrible days. War changes a man, but in strange ways it clarified something inside me. It reminded me what mattered: family, dignity, the simple right to live without fear. Letters from home were lifelines. My mother wrote about rationing and working in the community. My sister spoke about school and learning to dream again. My father wrote the fewest words, but his sentences carried more weight than any speech. Proud of you. Be careful. Come home. Those three thoughts were my anchor. When the war finally ended and my boots touched American soil again, there was a strange silence inside me. Relief, grief, pride, and exhaustion all lived there at once. America looked different, stronger, busier, alive in a way the Dust Bowl years never allowed. There were jobs, there were houses going up, there was possibility instead of desperation. I went home not to Oklahoma soil, but to California, the state that once hated us, then slowly learned to need us. My family was still there, still standing. My mother was older, but glowing with quiet strength. My father's hands were worn, but his eyes finally carried rest instead of defeat. My sister wasn't a frightened child anymore. She was a young woman with hope. War didn't erase the past, but it gave us a future. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning again.
Coming home wasn't like stepping back into an old life. It was like standing in front of a new doorway with the past behind me and uncertainty ahead. America was rebuilding itself, and in that rebuilding, there was space for people like us, people who had already learned how to lose everything and start over. We stayed in California, not because Oklahoma wasn't still in our hearts, but because our roots had taken hold in new soil. The camps were mostly gone, replaced by neighborhoods, factories, and steady work. My father found a stable job. My mother had community, friends, purpose. My sister dreamed of things that didn't involve hunger or fear, of school, maybe a career, something beyond survival. We bought a small house. It wasn't grand. The floors creaked, the walls were thin, the paint peeled in places, but it was ours. No wind could blow it away. No storm could bury it. No one could chase us from it. There is a certain kind of quiet joy in owning something no suffering can touch. I found work too, honest work that didn't leave humiliation sitting heavy in your bones. I learned skills. I earned respect. I discovered what it felt like to be seen not as a burden, not as an okie, not as someone running from failure, but as a man who belonged where he stood. Evenings became something sacred. We sat at the table together, not counting every bite, not waiting for disaster, just being a family. Sometimes my father would sit in the yard and stare at the sky. I wondered if he still saw dust clouds, but when I'd sit beside him, he'd nod slowly and say,
We made it. Rebuilding wasn't only about money or houses, it was about dignity. It was about writing a new definition of who we were. We were no longer people driven from our land. We were people who had endured, adapted, and overcome. Yet the past never vanished. It lived in us like a quiet echo. When the wind blew too hard, my mother still checked windows. When fields dried a little in summer, my father tensed. When life felt too easy, a strange fear whispered, "Be ready." But scars aren't always weaknesses. Sometimes they are reminders of strength. California became home in time. The same state that once shut doors in our faces slowly opened them. The same people who once looked at us with cold eyes now worked beside us, shared neighborhoods with us, raised their children near ours. We didn't forget where we came from. We just chose not to live trapped there. And in that choice, our lives didn't just rebuild, they grew.
Whenever people talk about the Dust Bowl or the Great Depression, they like to tell stories of survival. They talk about resilience, grit, American toughness. They talk about the people who made it. But part of honoring history is remembering those who didn't. Because not everyone survived. Some neighbors never escaped Oklahoma. Some farms rotted into ghost fields, with homes standing empty like bones under the sun. I remember families who simply disappeared. One day their car packed, the next day gone, never heard from again. Some ended somewhere better, some didn't. Dust pneumonia took children. It took grandparents who couldn't cough out the earth filling their lungs. I remember funerals held not for soldiers or old age, but for kids who should have been running barefoot in fields that once grew golden wheat. Mothers cried silently because grief had become too familiar to scream about. Some people survived physically, but the storms never left their minds. I saw men who once stood tall now stare at fields with empty eyes, like they expected the land to betray them again. I saw fathers crushed, not by weather, but by failure they couldn't stop blaming themselves for. Dignity is not an easy thing to lose. Some never found it again. Even in California, not everyone found hope. There were families who stayed trapped in migrant labor their whole lives, never catching a break, never escaping poverty. America grew stronger, but some people remained behind the rising tide, swallowed by circumstance. War claimed others. Boys I laughed with in camps never came home. Names were written on telegrams instead of letters. Mothers unfolded cold paper with shaking hands and held it like it was a living thing that had just died. The Dust Bowl may have broken bodies and spirits, but war carved its own kind of wound across our generation. When I sit alone and think back, faces come to me. Some bright, some tired, some young and hopeful, some already worn at 15 years old. I remember the kindness too, the people who shared food they barely had, the workers who stood together, the government officials who finally realized we were citizens, not burdens. Memory is responsibility. Telling this story isn't just so people can say, "Wow, they were strong." It's so people remember that disasters aren't numbers or headlines. They're families, they're empty chairs at tables, they're laughter that never comes back.
History books talk about millions affected, but I think in names, in voices, in eyes I once looked into. We honor the living by remembering the lost, and I carry them with me, not in sadness alone, but in gratitude that I am here to speak when they cannot. With years between me and those storms, it's easier to see what they meant. Back then, survival was the only goal. We didn't think about lessons, we just tried to breathe. But looking back now, the Dust Bowl wasn't only a natural disaster, it was a warning written in dirt across the heart of America. It taught us what happens when land is pushed too hard. Farmers plowed fields endlessly, tearing up native grasses that held soil in place because progress seemed unstoppable. Wheat prices soared. People believed nature would always bend to human will. We forgot respect, and nature reminded us brutally that the earth is not something to conquer, it's something to live with. It also taught humility. The storms didn't just destroy crops, they shattered certainty. People who once believed hard work guaranteed success learned that sometimes life takes more than effort. It takes luck, timing, and mercy too. Pride was humbled, not to shame us, but to remind us that we are smaller than we like to think. It revealed America's flaws too. The prejudice, the fear of outsiders, the cruelty people show when resources feel scarce. Being called Okie wasn't just an insult, it was a dismissal of our humanity. It was proof that hardship doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it pushes them apart. That's a truth we shouldn't forget. But disaster also revealed something beautiful. Strength, community, endurance. We learned to share because keeping everything for yourself meant watching your neighbor's child starve. We learned to stand together because divided workers could be exploited, but united voices forced fairness. We learned to hope not in fantasies of perfection, but in slow rebuilding, in stubborn breathing, in refusing to surrender. People today sometimes think history is distant, like an old photograph fading on a wall. But the Dust Bowl lives in policies that protect soil now. It lives in the way America prepares for disaster. It lives in the resilience woven into our national identity. Some say modern Americans are softer. Maybe they haven't seen enough storms. But I believe the strength is still there, because strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's in the mother working 2 jobs. It's in the soldier stand and watch. It's in families rebuilding after fires, floods, or loss. It's in never giving up, even when giving up would be easier. The dust taught us we can fall hard, but we can rise, not quickly, not perfectly, but strongly.
Now I am an old man telling this story, and sometimes it feels like it happened to someone else, like a film I watched instead of a life I lived. But then the wind blows just right, carrying a dry whisper across the California evening, and suddenly I'm 12 again, staring at a sky turning brown. Except now, I'm not afraid. I sit on my porch, the sun dipping low, shadows stretching long, and I think about everything that's happened since then. I think about how the world has changed, cars faster, cities bigger, technology I never imagined. I think about how my life stretched far beyond anything that terrified boy could picture. Marriage, children, work, peace, laughter.
full life. Sometimes younger people ask me what it was like. They expect drama, constant terror, endless darkness. And yes, there was fear, there was hunger, there was grief, but there was also love. Family didn't break, we tightened. Communities didn't vanish, they formed. In the worst moments, people found the deepest parts of themselves. I tell them, history isn't made of big events alone. It's made of small choices to keep going, to be kind, to believe tomorrow still matters. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a tragedy, it was a testament to human endurance. The Great Depression wasn't only economic collapse, it was a test of character. And World War II wasn't only battle, it was sacrifice, unity, and purpose. When the wind rustles the trees now, I don't see death in the sky. I see memory. I see the boy who survived storms he never understood. I see the man who worked fields not his own and learned dignity anyway. I see the soldier who came home grateful to simply breathe free air. I see the husband, the father, the neighbor, the American. Life didn't give me ease, it gave me strength. And that, I think, is better. America isn't perfect, it never has been, but it endures the way we endured, through struggle, through mistakes, through courage that shows up when everything falls apart. We bend, we break, we rebuild, and somehow we move forward. So when I close my eyes at night and hear echoes of wind across the plains, I don't feel sorrow. I feel pride, because we survived, because we rebuilt, because we learned, and because no matter how dark the sky becomes, the human heart keeps finding ways to rise again.